So it's my privilege today to introduce a little bit more elaborately these two that I've had the honor of knowing for at least 30 years, I think now. You just heard that Heritage University celebrated their 40th anniversary, and I was young at the college. That was a long time ago, way back when, and had the honor of meeting both and working for Sister Kathleen. So, and Kip Ramsey. So a little bit about them, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their upbringing briefly, just so you can kind of get an understanding about cultural differences and the ability to think about maybe your upbringing or cultural perspectives aren't the way that other people think or have been taught to think, and it's important to recognize that and how do you accommodate that when you're building relationships with folks. So Kip Ramsey is owner of Ramsey Companies, but he has, and his family and ancestors have lived on this land as the very first keepers of this land, the very first humans to walk this land and care for the land. And Kip, I'm going to have you go first and share with them a little bit about your family and your ability or ability, your upbringing here on the Yakima Reservation.
Thank you, Sharon. I was born in White Swan. My family, at that time, we were livestock people, cattle and horses. We came along, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs came along. This was in the 20s, and they had what they call BIA cattle, and we were part of that. We were initially given 20 head of cows, and of those 20 head of cows at that time, we got to keep the heifer or the female calves, and the steers we gave back to the Bureau. And over a period of time, we accumulated over a number of years, probably around 1,500 head of cows. So we had a very large cattle operation, and I was raised in that. My mother, we would leave in the spring. This was before horse trailers and all that wonderful stuff. Everything was done horseback. And springtime would come, we would turn these cattle out on from White Swan basically to Mount Adams, and we would follow those cattle through the range and moving them from place to place. We would leave White Swan, we'd go to a place called Deer Butte. We'd be there in June, and in July we'd move into Almy Krells. We'd be there until August. In August we'd stay in beauty camp, and we'd stay there until it snowed and pushed us out. And that was the way I was raised, and my mother was of course a Yakima, and she was very much into plants, into what was around us. So even at a young age, we were taught the value of the land and what it truly meant to us, what these things were for and all that. So that was my upbringing originally as a young person.
And Kathleen, by difference to that, or similarities, want to share a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, probably quite different. I was born on the Stanford University campus in Palo Alto, California. My father was going to school there. My mother, in a graduate program. My mother was a physical therapist in the Army, stationed at the Presidio in San Francisco. That's how they met, being in the same general area. I was born there. I guess when I was 2 years old, I came down with asthma on my birthday party. And my mother went to her doctor and said, "This is it, I can't take this. I have a husband I know that has asthma, and I help him, and now I have a child that does. I don't know if I can handle that." And the doctor said, "Move to Seattle." We never did figure out why. Was that better for asthma? Well, at least it was different. So we moved to Seattle. I was raised in Seattle. My father was in finance, worked for Frederick & Nelson. Some of you may remember Frederick & Nelson in Seattle. Became the finance vice president. We lived in the central part of Seattle, Capitol Hill, the old Capitol Hill. And I went to Holy Names Academy for most of my 12 years of schooling. So my experiences growing up were certainly very different than yours, Kim.
So one of the things that you shared with me is a little bit about your first encounter and a lesson about, wow, this is when I knew things were quite a bit different. Is when you visited the Longhouse for the first time. And can you maybe describe that first encounter and what you learned from that?
Yes, I kind of chuckle about it now, but it was very difficult for me at that time. I was working for Fort Wright College in Spokane. I was the vice president for academic affairs, or I think we just called it the academic dean in those days. And I came down here for outreach classes that we offered, and so someone invited me to come to the Longhouse at some point. I thought, this is wonderful, I want to learn more about the Yakima people. So I showed up, I think it was at the same Longhouse where George Lee is one of the presiders outside of White Swan. And when I came up to the building, there was quite a few people lined up. They were in their traditional clothing, beautiful. So I thought, oh good, I'll just greet each one of them. So I went up, put out my hand first, and they all put out their hand for a handshake. Now, what was in my head was what my father had taught me. I remember my dad being pretty strict about this. I think I was about 12 or 13, and my sister would have been a couple years younger. And he said, now you girls need to learn how to shake hands with people. That's what you have to do as an adult. So you put your hand out, and when the other person grasps your hand, you hold it tight and really shake it with some energy. It shows that you really care about that person. You really are happy to say hello or meet them. So I'm walking into the Longhouse with this in my head. And I put out my hand, and the First Lady puts out her hand like this and just barely touches it and then pulls it away. And I thought, oh, maybe she's looking at somebody else. So I go to the second person, and same thing happens again. So about 5 people in a row that I greeted with handshakes, sort of. Well, I felt like they don't really want me here. This is for the local people. I shouldn't be here. I sat where they showed me, and I just kind of hunkered down for the whole evening's event. So the next day I went home feeling, I shouldn't have done that. I should have, I don't know. Well, that wasn't good. The next day I ran into one of my very good friends, Yakima friends, and they said, I heard you went to the Longhouse last night. How was it? I said, well, I don't think they were very happy to have me. I really enjoyed seeing what they were doing or learning a little. And she said, well, what do you mean you weren't welcome? I said, well, when I went to shake their hand, they just barely touched my hands, just very gently. She said, well, that's the way you're supposed to do a handshake. You're not supposed to do anything that looks like you're trying to control the person. You touch each other. You make connection. They were very much welcoming you. Well, that was a huge learning, and it really walked me into the path of seeing there's so many cross-cultural, what I call mismatches, cross-cultural mismatches, that because you have something different in your heart or your head than someone else does, what you do together doesn't mean the same thing. And until I had the good sense to tell my friend about it so she could explain that to me, I don't know if I ever would have gone back to the Longhouse. And after I learned that, I went lots of times, still go.
So Kim had a nice summary of that exchange in terms of the shaking of the hands, where, maybe the white dominant cultural piece, exactly to Kathleen's point, a very firm, shows a little bit of power, that kind of whole piece. And Kim, would you mind just lending a little bit of layer on top of that? In an Indigenous way, it means what? That you're showing up in respect, you're not dominating? What does it mean
I don't know that shaking hands is would be a qualifying moment for relationships between people in the sense that I think we're going to read a lot more into it than it truly is. It's a recognition, obviously, between people for one and the other to wish you goodwill and to honor you, to show respect to you. I don't think we need to necessarily dissect it any more than that. I think you just take it for who we are. We respect one another, and that's what it is.
So along those lines, but Kathleen has said together, and I'll ask you a little bit more about your relationship. So how did you first engage with Kathleen in terms of what made you be a little bit open to her, or listening, or what was that about? How did you approach that?
Well, I first came to Heritage, it's been 38 years ago or so, and I've been here on this board and involved with the university. Kathleen is an individual who is a very curious person. She's always interested in everybody, a very caring person, and in doing that, she brings forth that to whoever's around her. And so when Violet and Martha and Kathleen put together the concept of Heritage University, it was very much in line with that concept. And she didn't do it in the sense that we're going to put a university down here out of McKinley, and we're going to educate everybody, and this is good for the Yakima people. It wasn't done that way. It was done with respect to the Yakima people, that to go to the tribe, go to the people and say, this is what we would like to do. What do you think about that? Do you feel this is good? Do you feel this is bad? So that respect was there in the very beginning between Kathleen and the tribe and the people, and I think the people here honored that and respected that, and because of that, Heritage is where it is today. I know Dr. Sun, when he first came, was very interested in the people here, into the Yakima people. He went out of his way also to, I think he asked me for a copy of the folio note, if I remember right, and I gave him that. But his curiosity of who we were and what we were was important to him, and that follows through when it comes in down to the university itself and to the people and the staff that we have here today. And so it's very important we have that, I guess you could call it a cross-cultural relationship.
And I heard you mention once before a sense of humility when approaching.
Yes, I think that's very true.
And so it's been 40 years, 38 years, and you two, I think we definitely call you friends. I know that you have spent many a time together breaking bread and enjoying dinners. And so a little bit about, was it complicated? Did it form easily? I mean, how did you do that? And when you had this university to create, or issues to resolve as a board member or friends, how did that work?
Are you asking me that?
Both of you. Just anybody jump in here.
Education, I'm not an educated person. I went to White Swan High School, graduated, and that was it. I never went on to school. We always had work to do, and that's what we did. So when it came to education, I spent a lot of time with elders, with people that whose grandfathers were at the Walla Walla. And there was, without a doubt, mistrust between the white people that are coming into the reservation and what was going to happen to us because of that. At the Walla Walla, we were promised by Stevens that if we were to give up 29,000 square miles of our ceded area, that in turn we would retain basically 1,200,000 acres of the Yakima that we have today. And we were told there will be no white people in the Yakima. This is your country. You're safe here. You don't have to worry about people stealing your horses and your cattle. We were told the Great White Father would protect us. So those feelings went on as Washington State became a state, And it started encroaching upon the tribes and the reservations all across and around this state. And so there was a certain amount of mistrust there. And so education itself, it's questionable in some respects. We had our own education. You have to remember these people that were here were the controllers of this land, of everything. We had our own education. We didn't need universities or anything. We taught ourselves. We lived with our environment. This is what we did as Yakima people and as Native people all through the Northwest. And so it was a little on the difficult side for me to endorse education, other than the sense that I was taught to endorse it. And that is that we need to be educated because we need to understand the people that are coming into our lands. We need to know what's in their minds. What are they going to want? What are they going to take from us? It wasn't, I want to get an education just so that I have an education and I can get a better job. I think in the beginning it was simply, we need to know what these people are and what they're going to do. And that mistrust was there, and even somewhat is there today. You have to remember how this worked, and even the Walla Walla, if you go back that far, and think about this for a little bit, when they had the treaty at Walla Walla in 1855, the Nez Perce rode into that gathering, 2,500 strong, horseback, came into the Walla Walla. Even today, right now, you go over to the Walla Walla and put the word out, you're going to have a tough time getting 2,500 head of horses and riders to come into the Walla Walla. This was in 1855. So it isn't like we didn't have or didn't control our country. What really devastated the tribes and put us in the position of treaties was disease. And that started as early as 1700, it came in here. By the time Lewis and Clark got here in 1805, the tribes had already been devastated. Not just a few hundred or 10,000, but hundreds of thousands of people had died.
Smallpox.
Smallpox came through, whooping cough came through, diphtheria came through, venereal disease came in up the river as well. It was never here before. It all come from the Europeans and into this land. And it devastated the native people here.
You know, it's interesting, oh, excuse me.
1835 to 1840, 3 out of every 5 Yakimas died from disease. Yeah. And you think about that just a little bit. There was not a single person whose grandfather, grandmother, nephew, child, cousin, uncle, or aunt had not passed. This is devastating to any society. Today we talk about COVID and we politicize it to death. And in turn, this isn't the first time pandemics came to this land. Yeah. So the native people have had all these trials. So when it comes to education, there's a certain amount of mistrust because education comes in because you want to assimilate me into your society.
And the really interesting thing is that the initiative for Heritage University came from 2 Yakima women, Martha Yallop and Violet Lonely Brow. And they came up to Spokane, to the college where I was working, and said, we need some classes and we need a 4-year degree. There's only a 2-year degree at the community college. There's nothing else. People can't travel there. We need your help. And this is how we wanted to work. They had it all worked out. They had gone away to get their 4-year degrees when they were young. And they just knew that so many people couldn't do that because they were running Head Start program. So I think what is interesting is that someone reached out from one side of that to the 2 sides, simplifying and making it 2 sides, but someone reached out, and then how the person on that side reacted was very important too. But that ability to ask, it's partly the curiosity that you mentioned, but also partly the looking at the bigger picture, at the long haul. You know, okay, all these things have happened to our people. We got to figure out how to get to the next step. So any of us in 2 different groups trying to see from the other side is very important.
Yeah, so clearly that bigger picture of how is this going to impact us, but I love the idea that it actually came from community, a solution from community, folks saying, how could we get some help here, what would that look like, and not just giving control over as well. So it came out of this mutual respect, it sounds like, and moving forward in small steps. And it was a long, difficult haul for the few years in the early stages there for sure. So, so now you're friends. Maybe give us a summary of how you view each other now in a relationship, and then we'll wrap this up.
Well, I'm thinking of a funny story. I know we might have taken too much time, but you know, Linda, who is Kip's wife and a very wonderful friend for many years too, both of them together. Linda got recruited a little bit before Kip did to try to do something to get this idea started. They really wanted this. And Linda then recruited the largest company, the woman, wife of Morris, Kathleen Hitchcock, the big White Swan Lumber Company was out there, and recruited her, and then the two of them said, we've got to get some of the other leaders from the community. And Kathleen came up with the idea of, I'm going to bake the biggest chocolate, German chocolate cake that I can, and we're going to go visit Mr. Labby. Now Labby Mint down here, as all of you know, is good Yakima people, is the largest producer of mint oil in the world. So, but how they got Jack Labby to say, yes, I guess I'll come to a meeting of this group, is they took such a fancy German chocolate cake that he couldn't say no.
See, food's at the heart of the game. You gotta have food to build bridges, right?
Well, that's what I have had so much good food at Kip and Linda's beautiful home way out beyond White Swan. We've shared a lot of wonderful meals. And then good conversation and caring for each other as difficult things have happened in life.
And don't let them fool you. They actually apparently do debate pretty heavily about things and politics and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, we don't agree on everything. But we agree that being friends and respecting each other is very important.
Yes, I think that's the main thing. We have to respect one another. The more we know about each other, it's easier to understand one another. And that's a great part of that. Again, Kathleen is a dear friend and has been for many, many years. Her passion for what she does is infectious, and it's one of the reasons I'm here and set on this board. Is simply because of that. And it's been a great time for me in my life to have known her and to have worked side by side with her. And like she says, we don't always agree, but that's fine. We agree to disagree, and that's life.
And it's very helpful to have people who see things differently on a board or on whatever your project you're doing. See people seeing from a different viewpoint. You have to have a hard conversation about it. You don't agree, but it helps you understand where the next steps can be.
Oh, clearly, there's strength in all of that, different thinking in different ways. So thank you both for being here today. Please give a round of applause to our